So, you've seen the promise of AI automation, right? These simple drag-and-drop tools that are supposed to let anyone build these incredibly powerful workflows. But what happens when that shiny, perfect demo smacks into the messy, complicated reality of a real business? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. Why that exciting promise so often falls apart in production. And this quote from Wharton professor Ethan Mollick, who is a huge voice in the AI space, it just hits the nail on the head. It really exposes this giant paradox we're seeing in automation today. We're being sold on these visual, node-based tools as the next big thing. But are they really a leap forward? Or are they, as he puts it, just a failure of imagination?
And that right there, that's the heart of the paradox. The source material argues that tools like OpenAI's AgentKit are amazing at making it super easy to build an AI agent. But here's the thing. They totally ignore the real challenge, which is making that agent actually work reliably, at scale, day in and day out inside a real company. The bottleneck isn't creating it, it's running it.
So, this leads us to what the analysis calls the production paradox. And it's this really dangerous gap where the ease of building a cool-looking demo gives you this false sense of security. You feel like, hey, we're 90% of the way there. But in reality, the toughest part of the entire journey hasn't even started.
This slide just lays it all out perfectly, the gap between the marketing hype and the on-the-ground reality. The no-code promise is that any business user can suddenly become an automation wizard. But the reality? You still have to think like a developer. You're the one connecting nodes, setting up guardrails, and figuring out custom integrations. And that leaves the real business experts, the people who actually know the processes inside and out, stuck on the sidelines.
Okay, so this paradox isn't just some high-level theory. It actually shows up in three critical gaps, three specific areas where these visual builders consistently fall flat when you try to use them in a real enterprise. Let's dig into each one.
First up, we've got integration hell. And yeah, it's about as fun as it sounds. See, these visual builders look great because they have all these neat pre-built connectors for simple apps. You know, your Google Drive, your Slack. But the data shows that over 80% of the real work, the important stuff, happens in these massive complex systems like SAP, Salesforce, and custom-built internal databases. And those simple connectors, they can't even get close.
Just think about a totally normal process like onboarding a new supplier. On a visual canvas, it looks so clean, right? Just a few boxes and arrows. But to actually make it work, you have to handle weirdly formatted emails, you need to talk to SAP-specific APIs, update records in Salesforce, kick off internal workflows. The visual builder shows you the what, but it leaves you completely on your own to solve the really hard technical how. All right, so let's just say you are a superhero. You've battled your way through integration hell, and you've actually built something. The next obvious question is, how often does the darn thing actually work? And that brings us to the second gap, which, honestly, is pretty shocking. Around 50%. Yeah, you heard that right. According to actual production data from a company like BT Group, the success rate for some of these AI agents is basically a coin flip. Just let that sink in for a second. For a critical business process, something in finance or procurement, would you ever accept a 50-50 chance of it working? No way. That's just not going to fly in any serious business. And this slide is exactly why that number is so low. A demo lives in a fantasy land. It's got perfect data, it only follows the happy path, and there's only one user. Production is a chaotic mess. You've got system outages, weird edge cases you never thought of, hundreds of users trying to do things at once, and you need audit trails for compliance. Visual builders are built for the fantasy land, not for the real world. Okay. This final gap is huge, and it's not even about the tech. It's about people and knowledge. These visual tools force your business experts, the people who have years of deep, valuable knowledge, to try and translate all of that expertise into a rigid, technical, node-based diagram. And you know what? So much gets lost in that translation. Which leads us to a really fundamental question that the source material brings up. What's the right way to go here? Do we really want to force our best people in finance, in operations, in procurement to become part-time developers? Or shouldn't we be building platforms that are smart enough to understand them when they just explain what they need in their own words?
You know, answering that question points to a completely different way of thinking about all this. In response to those three gaps we just talked about, the analysis lays out a whole new architecture for automation, one that puts the business user, not some fancy visual canvas, right at the center of everything.
So first, let's just quickly remember the old model, the way visual builders work. A technical user has to map out the entire workflow. The platform just does what it's told. And when it breaks, which we know happens about half the time, the burden is right back on that user to dive in and figure out how to fix it.
Now, contrast that with this new model. Here, the business user just describes the process in plain English. The platform does all the heavy lifting of actually building the automation. And this is the game changer. When a system like Salesforce pushes an update that changes the interface, the platform can actually self-heal, adapting on the fly without anyone having to go in and fix it manually.
Wow. I mean, when you put it all side by side like this, the difference is just night and day. Look at the huge contrast in every single category that actually matters to a business. We're talking deep integration versus simple connectors, a 95+% success rate versus a coin flip, natural language versus node design. It's not just a better version, it's a totally different world.
So, what's the big takeaway for you? When you're out there actually looking at automation tools, how do you cut through all the noise and the flashy demos to figure out what's going to work in the real world? Well, the source gives us a really clear checklist. These are your non-negotiables. Don't ask if it has a Dropbox connector, ask if it connects to your instance of SAP. Don't fall for the demo, ask for a guaranteed success rate in production. These are the questions that separate the toys from the real enterprise-grade tools.
And this leads to the tough questions you need to be asking inside your own company. These are the conversations you have to have with your team and with any vendor you talk to. Who is really going to build this? What's our plan for when our CRM updates? And how on earth do we scale this beyond just one person's pet project?
And that brings us right to the final, bottom-line question that this whole analysis is really about. When you look at any automation platform, you have to ask yourself this. Is this tool built to look good in a sales demo, or is it truly architected to reliably run a critical piece of my business? The answer to that single question, well, that's going to make all the difference.